Well, welcome everybody to week 1 of Trust and Follow Jesus. Yeah. We've been looking forward to this for months and months and months, and it is finally here. And this whole series, everything that we're doing, is a kind of a spiritual growth initiative, if you will, to help us all trust and follow Jesus with everything that's in us. And really what we're going to be doing over the next several weeks is focusing on the core message of the Christian faith. It is essential that we get the core message down. And so if you are new to Christianity, or if you're just kind of interested in Christianity, or if you have been a follower of Jesus for years and years and years, this series will give you the opportunity to discover and then to even dig down deeper into some of these things, and will provide a foundation for us that will last us for a lifetime. And so, in addition to all of the Sunday messages that we're going to be doing every week, we've got small groups available for you. If you're not in a small group right now, you're in luck, because we're going to do Wednesday night and Thursday night here at the campus. You can sign up for a group on either Wednesday or Thursday, and you can plug right into that. We want everybody to be a part of one of those groups. And if you're in a normal small group that meets during the week in someone's home, then you're all set. You know what you're going to do. And so we want everybody to be to fully invest in this series, both on the Sunday morning and during the week. We've got a workbook that goes along with all of that, that is written to kind of go a little bit deeper into some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And so what I say on Sunday morning is not always going to be the full picture. And so it's kind of a 1-2 punch here. And so we want to invite everybody to be a part of that. And as we begin this series of Trust and Follow Jesus, the core message of the Christian faith, it all begins with God. That's where it begins. Bertrand Russell was one of the most famous atheists of the last century, and he died when he was 97 years old. But when he was 90 years old, he was at a kind of a dinner party, and the story goes that this woman came up to him and said this to him: "Mr. Russell, you're not only one of the world's most famous atheists, but you're also probably the oldest atheist. You're going to die soon," which is, when you're 90, the odds are, "And what will you do," she says, "if after you die it turns out that God does exist? What will you do if you come face to face with this God that you've defied your whole life long?" That's a pretty direct question, isn't it? Pretty bold question to ask somebody who says, God doesn't exist, I don't believe in God. It's like, well, you're going to find out sooner or later. What are you going to do if he does exist? And Bertrand Russell responded, and he pointed his finger. He said, "I'm going to point my finger at God, and I'm going to say, 'You, sir, gave us insufficient evidence. Not enough evidence to believe in you.'" Antony Flew is also recognized perhaps as being the 20th century's most influential atheist. And yet, in the last several years of his life, he came to believe in the existence of God. In fact, he kind of came out, he had a coming out party as a deist, and to do that, he actually wrote a book. So here's a guy that for 50 years was the number one atheist, and then he comes out that no longer I'm an atheist, I actually believe in God. And so he wrote a book with the title, "There Is a God." There is a God. And so in this book, he kind of tells the story of how he went from being the most influential atheist in the last century to belief in the reality that there is a God. And in the end, there were several kind of clues that helped him along that journey that led him to belief in God. Now, it's true that no one can prove absolutely that God exists, but what you can do is look at the evidence. Contrary to Bertrand Russell, you can look at the evidence, and all of a sudden you get a clear picture that points exactly to the existence of God. And when you research these clues, you're going to find between 20 and 30 of them that are often mentioned by people. And while none of these clues alone is conclusive, together, when you put them all together, I believe enough weight is given to reasonably believe that God exists. And so Antony Flew spoke about some of the clues in his book that led him to abandon atheism, his lifelong atheism, which he taught thousands and thousands to follow in him, and then he ultimately embraced the reality of God. And one of those things, we're going to look at a few today. One of those things was what he called the laws of nature. The laws of nature. Flew asked, who wrote the laws of nature? Who wrote these laws? Now, all scientific inductive reasoning is based on the assumption of unchanging natural laws or laws of physics. In other words, the reason why we can actually do science is because there are laws that govern the universe that don't change. So where do these unchanging laws come from that actually make our universe possible? And by laws of nature, I mean things like this, and we can boil it all down, no pun intended, but pun intended. We can boil it all down to this. You boil some water in a pot and then put it on your counter, and over time, what's going to happen to that boiling water? It's going to cool down. And what we find is that water will boil tomorrow under the identical conditions of today. It doesn't change. Another thing that we learn is Newton's law, first law of motion. In other words, that an object at rest or an object in motion will remain at rest or in motion unless acted upon by an external and unbalanced force. So those are laws. Flew writes, the important point is not merely that there are regularities in nature, but that these regularities are mathematically precise, universal, and tied together. Einstein spoke of them as reason incarnate. The question we should ask is how nature came packaged in this fashion, because it did. Stephen Hawking, you may recognize that name, one of the smartest scientists in our generation, or perhaps in history. He says this, the overwhelming impression is one of order. The more we discover about the universe, the more we find out that it is governed by rational, in other words, they make sense, laws. And it's kind of, Antony Flew went through this whole process, going through all of these realities. He came to agree with what Paul Davies writes when he says, the contrived nature of physical existence is just too fantastic for me to take on board as simply given. It points to a deeper underlying meaning to existence. And so as Flew, an atheist for 50 years, as he thought through all of these things, he reasoned that if rational laws exist in the universe, and they do, then something must impose those laws, these constant laws on the universe. And as he began to kind of unfold through all of this, he believed that a divine mind was responsible for these natural, consistent, unchanging laws. And after a lifetime as an atheist, this was one of the clues that led him to a belief in God. Another clue that led him to belief in God was the fine-tuning of the universe. The fine-tuning of the universe. Now this one, everybody, I'm just put your thinking cap on because this one's going to make your brain hurt. It's going to make your brain hurt. For biological life to exist, biological life that looks like you and looks like me and really birds and trees and everything, for biological life to exist, the universe requires mind-numbing, mind-blowing balancing of more than 24 physical laws. Let's just consider 3 today. And really, this is going to hurt your head, so get ready for it. One is the force of gravity. Now, we don't think much about gravity, but you need to think about gravity, because if you didn't have gravity that pulled all matter together, we wouldn't have planets or stars or galaxies or complex organisms. Gravity must be fine-tuned to an unimaginable degree for life to be possible. Now, if you're going to measure the universe from end to end, measuring in miles won't get you there. It just won't. So we have to count in light years in order to try to even wrap our heads around how big the universe is. And light years refers to how fast light travels in a year. And light travels 186,000 miles per what? Second, not hour, but per second. 186,000 miles per second, or 5.8 trillion miles in light years in 1 year. That's crazy. 5.8 trillion miles in a year. Now you think about our neighborhood, not our solar system, but our galaxy. It would take you 100,000 light years to go from one end of our galaxy to the other. I'm sorry, but Star Trek has it all wrong, okay? You're not going from one end of the universe to another. It's not going to happen. It's impossible to happen. But to travel across the known, now this has changed. All this data has changed. I'm going by the old data because just a couple years ago, we put a new telescope out in space, the James Webb Telescope. Before, what we had access to was the Hubble Telescope. How many of you have heard of the Hubble Telescope? How many of you have heard of the James Webb Telescope? James Webb Telescope changes everything. But with the Hubble Telescope, scientists thought and astronomers thought, you know what, the universe is about 14 billion light years across. 14 billion light years across. So let's just, the force of gravity. Let's talk about the force of gravity, all right? So you can get your head wrapped around 14 billion light years? I don't think so. But if you could take a tape measure in inches, it's a big tape measure, let me tell you. And you could take that tape measure and you could stretch it out across 14 billion light years in 1-inch increments. If you even adjust the force of gravity by 1 inch compared to 14 billion light years worth of inches, life is impossible. It's catastrophic. That's the fine-tuning of the universe when it comes to the force of gravity. There's another one called the cosmological constant. All right, now put your thinking caps on. The cosmological constant, to kind of get real simple, is this is thinking about the energy density of empty space. Now I know that doesn't. I don't even know what that means. I know it's hard, but just stick with me. If the cosmological constant were too much, it would prevent matter from kind of clumping together. And therefore, again, no galaxies, no stars, no planets, no people, nothing could exist. Or if the cosmological constant were too little, the universe would have almost already imploded right back on itself. And the cosmological constant is so finely tuned. Remember, 14 billion light year, tape measure, off 1 inch, the whole thing's up to put. That's hard. But the cosmological constant is so finely tuned that some regard it as the single greatest problem facing physics and cosmology today. And you ask, well, James, how finely tuned is it? I'm glad you asked. Anybody play darts? Okay. Anybody good at darts? All right, couple, you got sharp eye, good eye-hand coordination. Let's just say that you're out floating in space. Maybe not in our galaxy, but in some other galaxy. And through your telescope, you spot the Earth. And you decide, you know what? I see a target on the Earth. I'm going to take my dart, and I'm going to sling it through space. And off it goes for the next 100 gazillion years to get to Earth. And it gets to Earth, and when it gets to Earth, it's got to go through the turmoil of the atmosphere, and then when it gets to the atmosphere, then it's going to hit all the wind and all the weather, and then all of a sudden it's going to find its target, and it's going to hit the bullseye, which is just a bit tinier than an atom. A bit tinier than an atom, which is a trillionth of an inch in diameter. And yet you hit it from some distant galaxy, just, that's the odds. And that's how finely tuned the cosmological constant is tuned. Now, these two by themselves, don't they? Make your head hurt. But there's another one, this is called the strong nuclear force. Decrease this strong nuclear force by 1 part in 10,000 billion, and all the atoms except hydrogen would be wiped out of the universe. All we'd have is hydrogen. no intelligent life, no nothing really. And again, there are over 20 of these, or 20 or 30 of these kinds of laws that have to be fine-tuned to this kind of specificity. It's crazy. It's crazy. Because if they're not all, not just one of them, but if they're not all finely tuned like this, life is impossible. It doesn't just take the force of gravity. It doesn't just take the cosmological constant. It doesn't just take the strong nuclear force. It takes like 20 of these, 30 of these things to be fine-tuned just exactly as they are, or life is not possible, nor is the universe. Again, Stephen Hawking writes, "It would be very difficult to explain why the universe should have begun in just this way, except as the act of a God who intended to create beings like us." An atheist. Physicist Friedman Dyson wrote, "The more I examine the universe and study the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe in some sense knew we were coming." Remember Richard Dawkins, famed biologist? He looks at the fine-tuning of the universe, all these 20 or 30 things, and this is what he says. So what? Oh gosh. Okay, so what? He says, this doesn't prove anything. The odds mean nothing if there were trillions and trillions and trillions. If there were an infinite number of universes out there, eventually one of them would spit out conditions for life. If there were an infinite number of universes out there, there would be an infinite number of universes just like ours. But there's not. And by the way, you know how much evidence there is of another universe out there, the multiverse? I know that's big in comics right now. You know how much evidence there is? There's no evidence. It's just made up because they're trying to come up with, how did we get here without God? And the only way they can come up with how we got here without God is an infinite number of universes that then maybe, just maybe, there can be life. Let me put it to you this way. Let's say that you hit like the mega jackpot lottery. You hit it next week. If you do, let me know. But you hit it next week, and then the week after that, you hit it again. And the week after that, you hit it again. And you hit it 30 times in a row. What are the odds? And if somebody hits the mega jackpot lottery or any lottery 30 times in a row, you know what you know? It's rigged. It's designed to do what it's doing. And when you see the universe hitting the jackpot over and over and over again, it's more likely to postulate and believe that something has rigged it to support life, instead of just saying, well, there are trillions and trillions and trillions of universes out there, one of them. And this is the conclusion at which Antony Flew arrived at, and was in part why he abandoned his atheism. I'm reminded of the passage in Psalm 19. Beautiful psalm. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they communicate knowledge. It doesn't ever stop. The universe never stops telling of the glories of God. There is no speech, there is no words, for their voice is not heard. Their message has gone out to the whole earth, their words to the ends of the world. Another clue that led Flew to believe in God is DNA. DNA. Now, we know a lot about DNA over the last 30 years. Science has let us know that DNA is basically, it's a language code. It has four letters in that language code, right? And in that language code, in the strand of DNA that's in your body, there are 4 billion characters. It's nature's most exquisite, detailed, like instruction manual of how to build you and you and you. It's all different. Everyone's DNA code is different just for you. 4 billion characters long. And that DNA code is in every cell of your body. Every cell could replicate your whole body. But that DNA code not only gives you the whole blueprint of your whole body, but it also gives every cell in your body the exact job description it has to do to make the whole thing work. George Sim Johnson writes this about DNA. He said, human DNA contains more organized information than the encyclopedia. If the full text of the encyclopedia were to arrive in a computer code from outer space, most would regard it as proof as extraterrestrial intelligence, you think? You think? But when seen in nature, it's explained as the working of random forces. Please. But it's not just random forces or random information. It is specific information that makes sense. It's the language of the molecular cell. And here's the thing. That DNA language was in the cell from the beginning of all biological life. It did not evolve. It was there on moment one. The whole thing. The whole thing. And so how did that complicated language get there? Flew agrees with Paul Davies when Davies writes, the problem of how meaningful or semantic information can emerge spontaneously from a collection of mindless molecules subject to blind and purposeless forces presents a deep conceptual challenge. Really? I'll bet. And this is why Flew concludes, the only satisfactory explanation for the origin of such end-directed, self-replicating life as we see on earth is an infinitely intelligent mind. Language and information comes from intelligence, which comes from a mind. I mean, for example, some of you, haven't you ever been to the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., right? It's just kind of it's a heavy thing. You go up there and you see these thousands of names. And every single one of them is spelled correctly, etched in granite. And you don't go to the Vietnam War Memorial and look at it with those thousands of names, all spelled correctly, representing the fallen soldiers, and say, my goodness, it's amazing how that sandstorm carved all these names into that granite. No one says that. No one says that. Science, you see, is screaming and pointing toward a creator God standing outside of time and space who has created everything that we know. A few years back, our family had the privilege of going and looking with our own eyes at Mount Rushmore. And no one goes up to Mount Rushmore and says, wow, it's amazing how 40 million years of hailstorms carved out the side of those, all those presidents' faces that we could actually recognize. No one says that. Why? Because we're smarter than that. We're smarter than that. No, in any area of life, we look at language and intelligence and design, and we know there is someone behind all that design. And DNA is a profoundly powerful clue to a designer, a God who uniquely crafts each one of us and knows us by name. He put your DNA together. He wrote your DNA code. Reminds me of Psalm 119, where the psalmist wrote thousands of years ago, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Oh, yes. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Of course. DNA does not prove the existence of God, perhaps, but it's a clue. And then there's the last one, the existence of the universe itself. Now, going all the way back to Aristotle and Plato and philosophers and scientists, they all thought the universe was eternal, that it had always been. And that belief was held up until about the mid-1800s. when scientists began to discover what we now know as the second law of thermodynamics. Now, this is the law of entropy, that with no outside influence, energy will dissipate over time and be used up. For example, you put a hot coffee on the counter, and you walk away from it, you come back, and it cools down, right? That's the second law of thermodynamics. Time magazine, a number of years ago, ran an article that basically, the title of it was How the Universe Will End. How the Universe Will End. It was a cheerful article. It basically said there will come a day when all pockets of heat will go stone cold. All sources of light burn up. The universe at that point will grind to a halt and be motionless. Sweet dreams, everybody. That's how it's going to end. Now, you say, James, what's the point? The point is this. If the universe will one day end, that means that it cannot be eternal. That if it hasn't run out of energy, then it had a beginning at some point in time. Again, Stephen Hawking writes, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning. In other words, there was a point when absolutely nothing physical existed. And then literally out of nowhere, all physical space and time and matter and energy came into being. And philosophers have developed kind of a simple summary of this whole process of God's existence based on the creation of the universe. And it goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe had a cause. And the Bible teaches that the creation of the universe is the work of God. In fact, the very first verse of the Bible could not be more clear. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There are many people who think that the universe itself is a clue that points beyond itself to something that is not physical, something that does not depend on anything else for existence, something of immense power. Something like that has a quality like what we think of as a mind. Indeed. And 2,000 years ago, a Jewish scholar by the name of Paul penned these words. For his, speaking of God, for his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature. In other words, divine nature is something capable of existing apart from depending on anything else. His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. And as a result, people are without excuse. Why? Because you can see it. And don't let somebody say, well, if we only had an infinite number of universes, it's possible. Is the existence of the universe like ironclad proof that, it is for me. You don't have to, got me. Uncle. But if you start combining that with the physical laws of nature and the fine-tuning of the universe and the DNA and the existence of the universe, and then you add another 30 arguments like that, their collective force points to a rational, reasonable conclusion that God exists. And when you think about that kind of God, what's his nature? What's the nature of a God who calls into being that which does not exist, as Romans 4:17 suggests? What attributes does such a God possess? Many, but here are three. That God possesses the attribute of transcendence. Transcendence. I love that word. It's a theological term that emphasizes the distinction from God, from all other things, from his creation. And it's his sovereign power over it. Theologian from a generation ago described God as being wholly other, entirely other than everything else in creation. In other words, God is not a part of the universe. He's not like the sum of the parts of the universe. He's not the soul of the universe. A lot of religions teach those kinds of things. A lot of people espouse those kind of things. All of those things are false. Who is God? God is the eternal, uncreated, absolute, self-contained, self-existent, sovereign creator whose will and power, by whose will and power all things exist. That's who he is. They depend on him for their being, and he depends on nothing because he stands outside of it. The very essence of God is different in kind from everything else in creation. The basic difference is that the transcendent God is infinite, which means he is unlimited. He is unlimited in regard to time. He's eternal. That means that he has no beginning and he has no end. It also means that he is above time. In other words, he sees all things, the whole sweep of history, at the same time in one glance. He's transcendent. God is also unlimited regarding space. We call this his omnipresence. In other words, God is present everywhere at the same time. He literally fills the entire universe. He's everywhere at the same time. He's completely present, and he's consciously active in every part of space at all times. He's omnipresent. And he's also unlimited in regard to power. We call this his omnipotence or his omnipotence. He's omnipotent. This is what the Bible refers to when it talks about the Almighty God. Like his power knows no limits. Certainly, if God can create the universe from nothing, he can do anything, right? That God exists and that he is the creator of everything. When you understand this, it has huge implications. Huge implications. You can't ignore this. A transcendent God who's omnipresent, who's omnipotent, you can't ignore that. And it has implications for us. Jack Cottrell is a theologian. He suggests several implications. He says, first of all, the first implication is the physical universe. In other words, physical matter is inherently good. A lot of people say that matter's bad and the spirit is good. And no, God created everything, and if God creates it, it's good. That's what it says in the creation account in Genesis 1 and 2. God created and it was good. God created and it was good. God created and it was good. And then it gets to humankind and he says God created them and it was very good. It's like, wow, it's amazing. Of course it is. Of course it is. The second implication is this, that creation supplies this universe and its history with a purpose and a goal. That the fact that God created the universe gives it a purpose and a goal. And here, it's kind of like, is the answer to the big question that people ask, what's the meaning of it all? What's the point? Only a deliberate act of creation by a personal God makes purpose and a goal possible. If there is no God, everything's meaningless and absurd. The third implication is creation gives human life a purpose and meaning. If the act of creation of the universe gives it a purpose and meaning, then how much more does your creation give you purpose and meaning? People are looking for their purpose and meaning in life apart from God. Look, apart from God, there is no purpose or meaning in life. You don't have to go out and discover yourself. You have to discover who God says you are. Why? Because he put your DNA together. He's your creator. He's your creator. It also means that there's a meaning to what it means to be human. A lot of people say, what does it mean to be human? We've got transhumanism and all this going on and the blurring of the lines. And God said, no. I'm the creator. I define what humanity is. Because if God doesn't define what it is, then it has no answer. It just got, limitless number of answers to what it means to be human. The fourth implication is that creation provides a basis for morality. Only a transcendent creator God has the ability to set absolute rules and standards for what is right and wrong. People say, well, there's no truth. Truth is relative. No, truth is not relative. You know why I know that? Because God exists. The laws of science, the laws of nature, the laws of physics aren't relative. They're set. And absolute truth is set by the same God. If this wasn't true, then then whatever happens in culture, all of the norms of culture, they become what's true. And who wants that? I mean, honestly. If all the norms are relative, then the concept of sin, in other words, going against what is right and what is wrong, is also meaningless. And only a transcendent creator God has the kind of inherent authority that absolutely obligates us to obey him, his rules, his ways. That's a huge implication. Another implication is that creation means that we are forever creatures and that we are not now nor never will be divine in any sense. Let me say that again. Creation means that we are forever creatures, that we are not now and never will be divine in any sense. The human soul is not a little piece of God. Salvation never involves becoming divine or becoming gods, as many false religions teach. Another implication is that creation requires that we also stand in awe of our Creator. It's the foundation for worship. Why do we worship God? Oh, seriously? Wow. We must always regard God with fear and with reverence. And finally, creation is the basis for stewardship responsibilities. If God owns everything by creation, and he does, then we are only always stewards of his creation. When we abandon the reality of the existence of God and when we embrace the atheistic philosophy of Darwinian evolution, we throw ourselves into chaos. You are not here by chance. You didn't get here in little increments. Macroevolution is not true. Just isn't. Do the research. Just the things that we talked about today. Are there little changes over time? Yes, that's microevolution, not macro. It's Of course, things change over time. But change from one cell, basically, and I've said this before, evolution teaches that you evolve from a rock, like literally from a non-biological rock. No. You were created by a God who loves you. And more than that, sent his son for you. If there is no God, then we are accountable to no one. Might makes right. Watched a clip just this week of a guy beating the life out of a woman on the streets. And another woman came up to try to help and he beat both of them up. You know why? Because he could. Might makes right. Morality is, if there is, Darwinian evolution is true, morality is determined by the crowd. We're not accountable to anybody. If all that's true, then there is no justice. There is no true justice. There is no true purpose or meaning to anything. I'm just telling you, the implications of the existence of God and the fact that he is the creator and the designer of everything is massive in its implications for us. And so when we come to the core message of the Christian faith, it begins with God, the creator and the sustainer of all things. So what do we do with all this? 3 action steps today. Number 1, participate in a small group. I mean, listen to the messages are great. You'll get something out of that, but you will get a whole lot more out of dialogue around these topics as we meet throughout the week in small groups of about 10 people or so. And again, if you're not in a small group, you can go out in the lobby today and you can find Sean Geis or somebody from our groups team, and they will get you hooked up with a small group either on Wednesday night or Thursday night. We've got 30, 40 of them that are going with leaders. Get in a small group. The second thing is to complete the weekly studies. We've got a little workbook. It's not something that's hard to read. It's, says a little bit. You ask you a question, you fill out the question, you leave a paragraph or two more, you fill out that question. You come prepared to these discussions, and it's going to be an amazing experience. It's going to help you grow spiritually. Some of you, it's going to help you to know, love, and follow Jesus. And others of it will deepen your already growing faith. And the third thing is this: invite someone to join you next week. Bring them with you to small group this week. Why? Because everybody in our city needs this message. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness and how all of creation screams that you are the creator, a good, loving God. And Father, I pray that you would ignite in us a season of growth as we talk about these core message of our Christian faith. And God, may you be honored by these conversations and these messages, and may you bring in us a change as a result. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.